Right, Peter, IT replacing AV?
Yes and no. I think the procurement method for AV is now an IT space. The design of AV is very much an AV space, but the dependencies on IT are enormous. We've had IT in-house in Australia since 2012, and every project we've done in the last probably 3 to 4 years, we've been asked to do the IT as well. And I'm not talking about infrastructure necessarily. I'm talking about how it works on the network. So there is a little bit of a push towards conversion networks, and the AV sitting on conversion networks causes some problems and some headaches because it's not really been done before to the extent that we're doing it now. So we have IT in-house to help that process go forward, and as a result of that work, we're getting more and more IT work coming through. So we're actually ramping it up quite quickly.
So how much AV is on the network, and what sort of problems you get?
Everything's on the network.
Everything?
Everything, yeah. We've got an installation going in about 3 or 4 weeks' time. Every single ceiling speaker is a Dante PoE ceiling speaker. Every single one. So
how do you maintain performance and quality
in that particular case, it's just for background music, so it's not particularly, it's not a sort of production space. But it's the way the market is going, and there are more and more of these products coming into the market. So as that happens, the demand goes up, the quality will go up with it as well.
Well, interoperability and the things having been an IT journalist, I think of certain things on networking, even though we talk about it, and so-called standards and what things work and what don't. I mean, how and knowing the AV industry isn't exactly the most interoperable thing on the planet. How do you cope with interoperability and compatibility and able to work together in different pieces?
I'm definitely not the right person to answer that question because I'm not an IT specialist. But needless to say, it is one of the challenges that is, I suppose, to some extent, opened the door for us to get in there and help and get stuck in. And I think IT people have always been reluctant, I think is probably the best way to put it, to let the AV boys in. But when you've got an AV company like ours with an in-house IT resource that speaks their language, those barriers come down quite quickly.
I don't think we helped ourselves either with our IT colleagues, because in AV we used to deliver signals across network cabling but not using network protocols. So we kind of made it look like we were deploying across the network, but we weren't really. And so at that point, IT people took one look at it. It wasn't standards based, it wasn't IP traffic, and they said no. And so we've been on the journey for 10 years now to actually undo all of that and try and work our way back into the confidence of those teams, because we're now much more standards based. So talking about interop as well, I think we're finally getting to a place where we're settling in on a few standards. Dante is a great example for audio, which is across a number of manufacturers. And so we've moved from a place even 5 years ago where interop, not talking about video conferencing, but talking about actual devices communicating, was much more of a challenge. But like I say, we seem to be settling in on a few key protocols that span multiple manufacturers, which helps.
You do a lot with education, don't you? So education are usually pretty savvy, and I always maintain they're well ahead of the corporate space, because because of what they have to do, keep their skills up to date, and they seem to be much more, because they're facing the music every day of the week, aren't they? And what they do and get through their challenges are just enormous, aren't they? Yeah, how they keep ahead of the game, I will never know. It's amazing.
Yeah. So we have been delivering converged networks into higher education for 5 or 6 years, and we're still not in a place with most of our corporate clients where they're doing that. So they're definitely pushing forward faster. There are security questions. Lots of our corporate clients, for example, are banks or professional services companies where the integrity of their network is almost top of their list above everything else. That is the case in higher education, but maybe it's a couple of places down on the list, so it gives them a little bit more flexibility to have a play. And higher education, in my experience, have always been keen to start pushing on with new things earlier, possibly. So the converged network I'm talking about at one of the universities was the first AV over IP deployment of its kind at the time. So that's a great example of where higher education is, like I say, keen to start to push the boundaries of what can be done earlier.
But they're under pressure to deliver, aren't they? They have a demanding user base that's paying a lot of money for its services, and
Absolutely.
they demand it works 24/7.
And they answer surveys. Universities are ranked unlike the workplace. So, the banks are not asking their employees to score them across all these different categories, and they're certainly not taking that information and showing it to prospective employees, whereas that's exactly what universities are doing. So whether it's AV or the Wi-Fi or the catering or the open spaces, all of those things are marked and graded, and that information's made public. So the driver is there absolutely for them, because they're competing for students effectively.
On your point about IT, how is that affecting the skill demands for the AV lot? Is the AV community thinking, well, it needs to re-educate itself to be able to work with and be on top of?
So I think so is the honest answer to that. But and I'll qualify that by comparing the IT's relationship with AV with the IT relationship with the broadcast side. So you probably know from your background that the IT world has been knocking on the broadcast door for years, trying to get in, but they're not knocking on the AV doors. So there's a different mindset there. So to tackle that, I think that the AV guys, we have to skill up in IT. We have to bring into our business IT people. The next major hire I'm going to do within Hewshott is going to be an IT guy at a senior level.
To do what?
To lead the IT space, lead the conversations with clients around the IT area. That's where we come into projects a bit late frequently, and many times, never mind the architecture, sometimes the technology that the client is deploying is then a barrier for us to actually do what we would like to do with them. So if we can get involved earlier and have those discussions with them earlier, then it helps them to sort of adjust their specification on their IT network and their switches and things like that, so that the AV can sit on it quite comfortably and work well.
Now, the problem we've got is getting people into the AV market itself and attracting new talent and everything else. I can imagine people of a different generation are probably more familiar with IT than someone of my age, for example. Certainly about mid-50s onwards, and a lot of them, aren't there, in the AV space. I just wonder where these people are going to come from and where that transition is going to be seen to be important for their skill set.
I don't know. I have to be honest. I do. It doesn't keep me awake at night, but I do worry a little bit about the things we were talking about before we started this conversation. Some of those softer skills that are required to have an experience in a room, not just a device that plugs in a wall and works, but what does it look like? What does it sound like? Does it feel nice? Do people feel comfortable immediately and can have a productive conversation through a video conference call because the acoustics are right, the lighting's right, all those sort of things that the IT world doesn't touch, but we do in our world. I don't know where those inherent skills are going to come from. People, I think, are coming into the industry through the installation process. There's always that path. In the consulting world, it's difficult to get somebody fresh out of university, isn't it, and do consulting, because they really don't have any runs on the board at all, or sort of exposure to what we're doing.
I wonder how prominent AV is on the recruitment board for most people. I mean, people of a certain age, but below a certain age, they don't mention the words AV at all, or audiovisual. It's a digital this or digital that. It's a different, complete description of what they're doing, but they overlap into our world. But it's become much more segmented, so they're concentrating on doing specific skills for the jobs they're in. But they're very appropriate to the sort of skills you want in an AV installation, with it being complex and everything else. And now that AV is much more central and becoming more embedded in what we're doing, since COVID, you're saying, well, are we sort of unconsciously slipping into this different role without us realising it? Is AV as a term dead in a sense?
I think so certainly we consider ourselves now much more experienced design consultants than AV design consultants. And one of the things that I think is important is, and most people in AV probably won't want me to say it, but actually the design of an AV system now is relatively straightforward. And actually I think we said this when you interviewed us together last 5 or 6 years ago. We said exactly the same thing. It's relative. There are complex spaces, of course there are, auditorium spaces, flexible spaces, broadcast spaces, they need expertise. But a standard meeting room or a standard teaching room is relatively straightforward to put together from a schematic perspective. How do the boxes connect together? Designing a room that is good is completely different. So as Peter said, acoustics, things like lighting, furniture selection, colours, all of those things. So I think the thing that's interesting is, are we looking for AV people, or are we looking for UX design people? You know, are we looking for people who have an understanding of the room and the experience and the journey that you want to take the user on, from how do they book the room, how do they know if the room is empty, how are we monitoring the room to make sure it's a nice environment, all those things, rather than pure, I can take a screen, I can take a switcher, I can take a laptop input and I can join it together with some cables. I think that's the smallest part of what we do now.
But sort of unconsciously migrating into services without realising it. I mean, when I first started looking at AV, I mean, you know, in the early 80s, it was basically office equipment. Then, many years on, you're looking at the amazing technology advances we made. But now, certainly, you realise since COVID, you're seeing it as a service and a bigger environment. I always thought, you know, AV was an environment of individual technology. I've been very careful not to ghettoise and focus on individuals, knowing that they all have to work together, hence the IT background. And it's better, it is the sum of its parts in a sense. But you certainly get the impression that since COVID we're having unconsciously thinking of a services mentality. And are we geared up to provide that sort of delivery to customers? And do they know what to ask for? I mean, so the customers themselves need a bit of education, don't they?
They do. And it's that briefing. We've said for years, we've always said that the most important part of a project for us is the briefing stage. So it's not doing the drawings, it's not managing the integrator, it's not even the witness testing. It's the briefing, because everything else we do rests on the quality of the brief. And people don't know what they don't know. If you give them a blank piece of paper for that reason, you know, they find it hard to list their requirements. If you lead them too heavily in certain directions, it's easy for them to jump on that bandwagon. So it's actually a really skilled piece of work, establishing what a customer's requirements are without either missing something because you haven't given them enough information, or leading them in the wrong direction because you've tried to give them too much information. So that's really where we focus a huge amount of our effort. And that, interestingly, going back to the last conversation, you don't really need to know anything about AV design to have that conversation. You need to know about people and environments and outcomes. You don't really need to know how many inputs there are on screen XYZ over there. So again, talking about the skill sets, that first piece is not really an AV job anyway. We do it as AV consultants, but I wouldn't say it's a traditional AV design type job.
Are the integrators going to have to acquire these skills and come into your space, or are you? I mean, it's different. You're sort of coming together, I would say, in a way. They're going to have to adapt, aren't they, to be able to provide more than just basic kit to differentiate and make an additional revenue.
Yeah, I think
especially with virtual production we've seen.
They do
no
a
one's going to
version.
install that, are they? They without thinking about services to maintain it.
No, I think the integrators do a version of that briefing phase, but I think they are, whereas we're entirely manufacturer independent, I think that there are pressures on integration sales teams to do a certain thing. It may be the products where most rebate is available, it may be the ones they've had training on, it may be just the ones they like the most. So I think whilst they do a version of that briefing phase, there are influences on them that don't exist in our case. So I think we're able to be a little bit more, we're all about the requirements. It doesn't matter to us whether it ends up being an NEC, a Samsung, or a whatever at the end of the day. The only thing that matters is, is the outcome exactly what the requirements were?
Where are the differences internationally between, is AV the world round, or are there other subtle differences in many more commonalities than we realise?
The technology is the same the world over, and I think, you know, COVID has really brought that to a head, and really quickly as well. The rate of adoption now is very, very high. Every single project we do, every single meeting room is a video conference room. every single one because it's so cheap and there's no reason not to. How people work around the world is different. I think in Europe, probably the US and certainly Australia, where we've got a lot of space, the working from home side of it has been quite probably successful. Is probably a good way of putting it. I mean, you still get the occasional, dogs jumping around in the background and children whizzing through the kitchen when you're trying to work on backgrounds. But that happens, and people think that's quite funny, and they sort of accept it. The Southeast Asia market is very different, though, because they're very, very, very high density living, and often, extended families living in the same property, and there just isn't the space and isn't the peace and quiet and isn't the ability to do it in the same way, not universally. So where in Australia and I think in the UK and certainly in the US, the sort of return to the office is not becoming something that is mandated strongly. In Asia Pac, I think people are actually wanting to go back to work just to sort of give themselves a break from a fairly small living accommodation, and those are really where the challenges are. So, I said every project we do, every meeting room, every small huddle room has got video conferencing capability in it. Many of the projects we're doing, we're actually seeing increased number of meeting rooms, increased huddle spaces, increased sort of private spaces where people can go and have, one-to-one, one-to-two type of meetings with people and video conference people in quite quickly. So ironically, we've seen an uptake in this technology, not a cut back in it. And that's all good for us. It's great. Can't complain.
Interestingly though, what we're starting to see now very recently is rooms for people to gather that aren't technology enabled. And this is another differentiator between us and an integrator. So integrator wants to put AV everywhere, obviously. For us, we want good experiences. And the reason is because what people are settling on, and it's very up and down with the working from home and everyone's trying to figure out what's going on. If you've got a day of Teams calls, you might as well stay at home. If you're coming to the office, it's probably to interact with people, in which case the people will come to the office. So there's always to conference someone in quickly, or half the team's here, half the team's there. But we're also seeing more of a drive towards nice spaces that are not necessarily designed around remote participants, which is interesting because it's kind of a reverse of what everybody thought it was going to be. But like I say, it seems to be settling on, if you're going to do nothing but calls, there's no point coming to the office. If you're coming to the office, it's because you want to interact with people, in which case there might be less requirement for remote participants. There are always offices in different countries, obviously.
Yeah. It's this aspect of interaction and collaboration that's changed, isn't it, not the technology, which actually wasn't as reliable as we all thought it would be when it came to the push. It was actually very unreliable a lot of the time. So I think it's been refined to a point. And I'm kitting up my own office at home, and the point was to make everything work effectively, so that it would be seamless. But I must have changed my office content around 2 or 3 times to make sure everything worked.
Almost everyone I speak to says that their working experience from home, when they're doing things like Teams calls, is far better than the office. Because they've spent 2 years now sorting out their monitor and getting it at the right height and buying a chair and a desk and a ring light or whatever they want to use, getting a good headset. They know where everything is, they're using their laptop, they know how to share, and that's without any of the benefits of not having the commute or whatever it might be. But just talking about pure experience, if I'm doing a drawing review with a team, 8 people at their desks is better than 8 people in a room. With the markup tools we have, everyone can see everything. You don't need to worry about the people at the back of the room. So I think the key thing is what, as our message has always been really, and where we start our briefing is what do you want to do is always the first question before how are you going to do it. And if you're going to do something that is suited to 8 remote participants, then do it that way if that's the best way to do it. And I think that's what's getting really interesting, is that employers, our clients, are not really trying to force people to do things in a way that I think what they're looking at is what's the best way to achieve each of the objectives that we want to achieve. And like I say, that might be everyone in the office, it might be everyone at home, it might be any number of things.
There is a sort of undercurrent of concern though in some of these bigger corporations about people working from home too much. There is that sort of, what are they doing? Are they really doing what they do? And when you're working in a business like ours where you're sort of outcomes based, it doesn't really bother us whether people are working at home or working in the office. We like them to come into the office because you get that natural collaboration that you get when you're bumping into people and talking to people, and that's something which I think is in danger of going if everybody just works remotely. But having said that, we're running projects where Perth is a small town in the grand scheme of things. It doesn't take me long to jump in the car and drive 20 minutes to go in for a meeting, as it doesn't take anybody else. But I can be on a Teams call. We've designed entire projects through Teams, even in the same town, and we've never met anybody in person. So that just indicates this is not an international thing, or it's not a cross-country thing. This is in the same town. So people are doing it by choice. They're saying, let's just do a Teams call. Why do we need to go actually meet in person?
But it's down to how well you use the technology, though, surely.
I think people have adapted to it really, really well.
Yeah.
Really, really well. And to the point where I think, COVID, of course, was a terrible thing. But if there's anything that's good that's come out of it, it's shown people that there is a different way of working, a more productive way of working, easier on us as people, not having to get suited and booted and go into meetings all the time. The newsreader sort of look fine from here up sort of thing, but I'm in my pajamas underneath. And it doesn't matter. It genuinely doesn't matter. What matters is if you don't deliver, or you don't achieve the outcome that's expected, or there's a hiccup, or what have you. So project managers have adapted, architects have adapted the way they work to manage teams to get the deliverables out so that the project isn't affected.
Has it made the managerial function easier, more predictable?
I don't think it's more predictable.
What sort of skills do you need to actually manage people remotely?
Oh God!
Has that changed?
Now you're asking somebody who runs a global company.
Well, I do wonder.
You have to.
Because I don't think many of us are sort of imbued with those.
You have to trust.
Skills.
You just have to
learn as you go along.
You have to trust people. You have to trust people. You have to believe that everybody is there for the right reason and doing the right thing. That's what you have to do. And it's not me that's necessarily going to find people out. It'll be their colleagues. Yet somebody would do a lot more heavy lifting than somebody else because they're not pulling their weight. They're the ones who are going to weed them out. It won't be me or it won't be Dan. It'll be their own people that do it. And when you've got we're fortunate that we've got a team of 30 plus people around the world. Each office is relatively small and therefore very personable and very interactive and very engaged. And if somebody's not pulling their weight, it really doesn't take long for them to come out. And we haven't had that problem. We haven't.
The technology makes you more accountable, doesn't it? Because you're there, it's in your face, and you see instantly what's going on because people are there in front of you, where they're fairly invisible in a normal working environment, aren't they?
They are, but there's also a flip side to this, which is that there seems to be a sort of expectation that you're there 24/7 as well. And that's not a good thing. So I think managing this, we're still feeling our way through this process. And I still think that there are some people that will go, do you know what? The computer's going off. I'm turning my phone off. Because, Teams, am I online is triggered through your phone or through an iPad or through a laptop. It's not just one device, it's multiple devices. And of course, people don't turn their phones off because they use them. But it pops up and says, I'm green, I'm available. Oh, are you there? Can I just ask you a quick question? And, I think it's difficult. I mean, because I live where I live and because I'm engaging with Dan and I'm engaging with our US office and what have you, I'm always there. I'm always sort of looking. So I do notice when some of my people are green. And sometimes they'll ping me and that's fine, I don't mind. But I do my best not to disturb them after hours because I know that home time is important.